Harley-Davidson announced its Q2 2025 earnings this morning. And let's just say it wasn't pretty, but there were some interesting things in that. Guys, my name is Rick, and this is the HDVIBE channel. Profits are down, bike sales are slipping, and dealerships are closing, but there were some more surprises. And we're gonna get into all that right after this. So that's right, guys. Harley-Davidson had its earnings release call this morning, July 30th, and talked about, well, pretty much the dismal performance, but there were a few surprises. So participants on the call were Jochen Zeitz, Jonathan Root, and a few others added some color commentary to the presentation. So let's first talk about the headline numbers. Let's first talk about Harley-Davidson revenues. So those revenues are not what happens at the dealership level. That is Harley-Davidson revenues from Harley-Davidson corporate to the dealership. So revenues were down almost 20% on a company-wide basis. If you look at it just from the motorcycle segment, revenues were down about 23%. This is a big decline, in addition to the huge decline they showed in the first quarter. Again, this is comparing quarter 2 2025 to quarter 2 2024. So I believe the first quarter was down in that 20-some-odd% range. So year to date, the numbers from a revenue perspective are not looking good. So how about profits? Are they making money? Yes, Harley-Davidson is still making money as a corporation, but their net income was down almost 50% to $108 million from $218 million the year before in the quarter. So that is the headline numbers. Revenue is down, profit is down. It is not looking good. However, again, Harley-Davidson is still a profitable company. Motorcycle demand is cooling. They were very clear in that. And Harley-Davidson really attributes that to the economy, the aging of its core customers, tariffs that they incurred during this year as a result of some of the tariffs that are going on around the world, and them having to absorb that, and then additional costs in their supply chain. Take that in totality, that increased their cost and therefore decreased their income, and as a result of the decrease in revenues, it was just a disaster waiting to happen. So what's happening with these motorcycles? So the core riders, again, they're targeting those touring bikes, the grand touring bikes. That's where their bread and butter is, and as we all know, they haven't had an entry-level bike, and I will tell you from my personal experience teaching Ride Academy, if you ask any rider under the age of 40, what motorcycle will you buy once you earn your endorsement by going through our course? Oftentimes the answer is, for that under 40 crowd, something other than Harley-Davidson. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, they're expensive. Two, it's not the styling that they're looking for. And it just doesn't make sense for them at that point in their life. You ask that same question of someone over 40, maybe over 45, kids are getting out of the house, they have a little bit more disposable income, typically their answer will be Harley-Davidson. And if you look at the demographics on my channel, HDVIBE, you will see the same thing. Most people that watch my channel are in that 40 plus range all the way up to 70, and they're here to learn about Harley-Davidson motorcycles, what I'm doing to these motorcycles, what they can do to their motorcycles. So I think it holds true, and Harley has been really targeting that demographic to try to keep the company afloat. But that demographic keeps getting older and older and older. And in my case, I know, am I gonna buy another Harley-Davidson? I'm probably their ideal customer. I have 3 Harley-Davidsons, but do I see a new Harley-Davidson in my future anytime soon? I don't know. Maybe, but maybe not. I think the story is the same for a lot of other people. Dealers are feeling the squeeze. So inventory levels at these dealerships have gone up, and they're just not selling as many bikes. Again, a lot of that has to do with the interest rates. However, if you listen to the dealership advertisements that come out, if you watch dealerships on social media, a lot of them are advertising below market rates for financing. How does that happen? Well, the prime lending rate to a prime lender in the market, The consumer, the customer, is going to be 7.5%. That is the prime rate. So how does Harley-Davidson offer something less than 7 or 7.5%? Well, Harley-Davidson Corporate buys that down. They buy that rate down so that those dealers have the incentive to try to offer that lower rate, again, to the well-qualified or very well-qualified individuals who are purchasing that motorcycle. Your rate will vary depending on your credit score, and a lot of people don't get those introductory rates. So again, it's kind of a teaser rate to get people in. Harley-Davidson is backing it to try to help the dealers out, but the dealers are really drowning in inventory. The bikes are just not selling. Again, I will tell you, going to dealerships, you're not seeing as much traffic in the dealerships. If you look at the results, sales were down in motorcycles, motor clothes, and parts. It was a trifecta, and Harley-Davidson did not ship and did not record revenue on their side as much because the dealers just can't afford to take the inventory. They're overloaded. Again, I will tell you, in the St. Louis market, the number of bikes that are rolling into dealerships versus the number of bikes that are rolling out and what's sitting there, there's still 2024s, and in some cases, I've seen 2023s still sitting on the showroom floor. These dealerships are struggling to survive. Takes me on to my next point. Dealerships are shuttering, they're closing down. In the last 18 months, there's been no fewer than 7 dealerships that have closed down, that have been long-term dealerships in markets serving people. In Missouri, we lost Hideout Harley-Davidson in Joplin, Missouri, for example. We lost one dealership that combined from 2. So Doc's Harley-Davidson closed. They purchased Gateway Harley-Davidson. They moved into the Gateway Harley-Davidson building and is now rebranded as St. Louis Harley-Davidson. So we have one less Harley-Davidson dealership in the St. Louis market. So from a dealership perspective, that probably makes a lot of sense. And you're going to see more and more and more of that. And I've also heard rumblings around the country where dealers just can't survive on Harley-Davidson alone, and they're trying to figure out ways to stay and keep the doors open. How are they doing that? They're bringing in other things, other power sports. CF Moto, you'll see CF Moto at a lot of these Harley dealerships, and frankly, I don't know how Harley-Davidson Corporate is allowing it unless they're saying it's outside of the Harley-Davidson motorcycle market because it's side-by-sides or smaller displacement bikes, but it is a problem. Dealers are closing. So what does that mean for you and me as the customer, as the consumer? Well, we're going to have less options for service. That service, in general, is going to take longer because there's fewer Harley-Davidson dealerships to service our motorcycles unless you're doing it yourself. You're going to have fewer options for buying, which I think from a dealership perspective makes a lot of sense because they're consolidating. Those dealerships can actually compete. They're not trying to kill each other, especially like here in the St. Louis market. You have one less dealership for consumers, customers to go to buy that motorcycle. They're not going 8 miles down the road and shopping this dealership with this dealership and then deciding who they're going to buy from. Well, now they have one dealership to buy from. Now they have that one dealership to buy from, and hopefully those dealerships are easy to deal with. Speaking of dealerships, I think the other thing, in my personal opinion, is dealerships need to be more transparent. I think in some cases, they're stepping on themselves despite trying to sell a motorcycle to somebody who wants to purchase a motorcycle. It's additional fees that you don't find out until the end. It's this add-on, that add-on, all these things. Well, you start with an MSRP price that looks okay, right? It's not outrageous, but by the time you get done, that $26,000 motorcycle becomes a $30,000+ motorcycle. And again, I'm talking about the touring bikes, and it gets a little frustrating. I know as a customer of anything, I want to make that buying experience simple. And a lot of times these dealers make it so difficult, and they're hurting for sales. Why would you make it difficult when you need to sell more? I'm going to give you an example. I purchased a John Deere tractor for my property. And if you want to go see my other channel, Mo Outdoor Vibe, I will put a link to that down in the description so you can go check that out. But I purchased this tractor, John Deere tractor, made in the USA, for that property. I literally got a discounted price online. I could not believe the price. I called the dealership up and I said, hey, is this a good price for this more? Salesperson that answered the phone, he looked it up, we put in all the specs, he goes, yep, that is the number, we can sell this to you. And it was thousands and thousands of dollars below the MSRP on the base tractor. I added other options. I actually purchased the tractor for less than the MSRP of the base tractor, and the whole transaction happened online, over the phone. I walked into the dealership, I wrote them a check for the exact amount we talked about over the phone. None of this games and adding this and this fee and oh, we got an upcharge and we got a destination fee and we got this fee and that fee, and before you know it, you got thousands of dollars of fee. No, it was straightforward. I wrote the check, I was out the door in literally less than 5 minutes. That's what these Harley-Davidson dealerships need to get to. If you have a customer that wants to buy a motorcycle, don't make it difficult. Don't do all these games and fun and games. Make it simple. So what's Harley-Davidson corporate doing to try to help out these dealerships? Well, again, I said they're cutting back shipments. Shipments are way down this year. And they're offering the incentives, which we talked about, on financing. They're offering discounts to veterans. They're offering these back-end deals. But get in, the dealerships have to get out of their way to be able to sell motorcycles. What's the other thing that happened? They announced today that they sold off essentially $5 billion of their Harley-Davidson Financial Services loan portfolio. And how much did they sell that for? A little over $1 billion. So essentially, KKR and another, I think PIMCO investors basically bought a $5 million portfolio for $1 billion. That's 20 cents on the dollar. So Harley-Davidson wanted that cash so they could pay down debt, and they essentially could survive some of the downfall and the drag on the company. Again, but they're still profitable, they're still generating cash, but they had to reduce their debt. Now, the other area that's dragging them down is LiveWire. I have no idea why they continue. I think they literally sold in Q2 56 or 58 LiveWire motorcycles. This makes absolutely no sense. So, the other thing that was exciting, I think, in some respects, is they're bringing out a new motorcycle in 2026 that is going to cost, as they say, according to Jochen Zeitz, $6,000. So they're trying to get into that entry market. So my guess is that $6,000 motorcycle is probably going to be based off the Ride Academy X350s, and maybe it's an X500 or an X750, but it's more of a sport bike. It's going to be lower cost so they can begin to attract that younger rider who then, as they begin to age, get further in their careers, have their houses, have their lives established, they then can begin to buy these more expensive motorcycles. They have to build a pipeline. So I believe the name harkens back to a model that they had in the 1960s and 70s. So Jochen Zeitz was all excited. He said there's going to be one version, I think is going to be more like a sport version, and one's going to be more of a cruiser. Again, I think it's probably going to be like the X350s we use in the Ride Academy. They are actually a pretty fun little bike to ride. I enjoy riding them and doing demos in the Ride Academy when I'm instructing there. So they are fun little bikes. So guys, before we wrap this up, what I'm going to ask you guys do is leave some comments down below. What do you think Harley-Davidson as a company is doing wrong? What do you think they're doing right? And what has been your dealership experience? Have you experienced something like I have? I think the other thing that we can expect, again, I mentioned this earlier, is longer service times if you take your bike into a dealership because there's fewer dealerships. The network is shrinking. So are we down to Indian motorcycle levels? Absolutely not. But it will continue to shrink, and I will say you will see more dealerships closing in 2025. Guys, if you like this type of content, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends. Also, go right up here to check this video out, and go right up here to subscribe to the HDVIBE channel.